Okay, so now we can set properties as favorites. Now I want to create a page that can show all of our favorites in one place. So I'm going to reuse the same components as we did on the My Properties and Landlord page as well, but I want to customize it a little bit more. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and I just want to close everything here first, and then I can find the front end here, and then I can create a new folder here called My Favorites. So new folder, My Favorites, and in there a new page called page.tsx. Then I can begin by importing the property list there, and we can also import get user ID because I only want to allow authenticated users to reach this. So import get user ID, and then we can set up an asynchronous function. So const my favorites page equals async fat arrow function like that. And then in here we can begin by getting the user ID, get user ID equals get user ID, and we can wait for this to finish. Okay, so now that we have the user ID, we can check if you are authenticated, and to do that we just say if we don't have the user ID, because this will return none if there are none. Next return, now we can generate a simple HTML just for this. So main, set the class name to be max w, set the max width to be 1500 pixels, and max auto to center this, and px6, so there's some spaces on both sides, and pb12, so we have some padding on the bottom of this. Maybe we should say py, not pb, so we have above and below, of course. And then you need to be authenticated. But if we have the user ID, then we can say return, then we show the real page. So I can copy this here, but here I only want the pb12. And then I create a div here for the title. It should probably just the same as we have here. Yeah, we can just copy this. Actually, you can just copy the rest here, so we have it and don't have to type it again. So my favorites, but instead of passing in the landlord ID, here I want to pass in favorites and set the value to be true. So we get a warning here now because this doesn't exist anywhere, but we're going to fix that very soon. But we just need to say export default and pass in my favorites page. So now this page is finished, we just need to fix this. So if I now find the property list, that is not this one of course, but I can open property list.tsx and scroll up where we have the property list props. Here we can pass in favorites, question mark to mark this as optional, and this can either be boolean or it can be null, because if you don't provide it, it will default be null or false, but we can also provide false if we wanted to do that. Then we pass in favorites here, so we can use it down in the script. So we already have this here, so we can just keep scrolling. I want to change this here a little bit. So if it's not a landlord page, then we can check OK. Else if it's a favorites page, then the URL should be this instead. Question mark is favorites equals true. And here I don't use the backticks because I don't need to pass in any variables or anything like that. So then I think I can set this, save it, go back. There are no errors. There are no errors. So then that looks good. Looks good down here. So then I just need to change the backend a little bit. So if I open up api.py inside the property app and find where we are listing out favorite, this is a list of favorites, so it's not that variable, but we can get it down here in the filter. Now we can say is favorites equals request.get and just pass in is favorites, and we can default this to be empty. And then, just like we filter for the landlord ID, we can say if is favorites, then the properties should be properties equals properties.filter, and then we want to filter everyone where favorited __ in user. So favorited not defined. Forgot to add the equal sign. So what this does is that it checks that if this list of favorites, which is one of these fields, many field, contains this user, then it will be added here and we will see it in the front end. So we can save now. And the last thing we need to do for testing this is to find the menu so that we can add the button to this page up there. So open up nav bar and find user nav. I want it together with properties and my reservations. So I can copy one of these and just replace the title with my favorites and go to my favorites and save. So if I go back here now and refresh, click there, my properties, no, my favorites, then you can see this page, or sorry, this property, which is one of my favorites. Great. So that means that now I can set this to done, and then that was it for that task. Before I continue, I just want to say thanks to all of my patrons. If you too want to support me, you will find a link in the description below. So now we can continue to make the conversations dynamic. So if I go, I think I hard coded this previously in books. Yes. So here I have a list of conversations. These are just hard coded, but we need a button for this page as well to the inbox. So we can have that at the top of these. Inbox, 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 and save. So now we have that there. Click, and we can see 3 hard-coded conversations. So I want to make this dynamic, which means that we need to create a database table and an app for this in the back end. So then we can start by going to the command line and we can stop this Docker running here. So the task consists of a few different things. First we need to create the app. So to go into the Django backend and see if I can use one of these commands. Start app chat. No, this is not running, so I can't start it. So I need to start it here again. I stopped it with the command line. Try one more time. ls, and now I have the chat app there. Perfect. So if I then go back to Visual Studio Code and open up settings.py, we need to append chat to this list here. We can add it at the bottom here together with property and user account, like that. Now you can save, and I just want to close everything. And if I find it at the bottom here, chat, we can open up models.py and begin by creating the database models. So we need to import UUID here, import UUID, and import models, but you can also import user that we have created previously from user account.models import user, because you need to connect both the conversations but also the conversation messages to a user. So let's begin by saying class conversation and pass in models.model. I want one field for the ID. I can just copy this from here, so I don't have to write this long here. Paste. I want one for users, so users equals models.many-to-many field, so that we can add both the host or the landlord and also the people who want to rent. So in here we pass in user and set the related name to be conversations, which makes it easy to get all of the conversations for all of the users. I want to know when this was created, so created at equals model.datetime field and set this to be auto now add equals true. And I want to know when this was modified, so each time a message is sent I want to update this field, so modified at, and this can be auto now is true. So this will only trigger when we add this field, but this will trigger every time we save a conversation. And then this is then the conversation, and the conversation can have multiple messages. So class conversation message. Did I write it correctly? Yes. Models.model. And here I also want the ID field. And I want a link or a foreign key up to the conversation. Models.foreign key, pass in conversation, set the related name to be messages, and on underscore delete models.cascade. So if you delete a conversation, all of the messages from this conversation will also be deleted. We need a body here, which can be just a simple text field, so we don't have any maximum length. Sent to, so we know who is the receiver. Is it landlord or is it the tenant? So this can also be a foreign key, so models.foreign key to the user model, and we set the related name here to be received messages, so that you can easily get all of the messages you have received. On delete, that we just do the same thing as here. And then we want to know who created this or who sent it, but I like to use created by every time that I want to refer to this. And this is also very similar to this. We just need to change the related name. Sent messages. Then I can copy the created it so that I know when this message was sent. I don't need it modified because you don't going to change a message you have sent. So then I can save this, go back to the terminal, and hopefully update the database. So I think that if I now just run docker compose up, that did not help now because this was running. So let me stop it. Then it was stopped there. But if I run it now again, you can see here, check if the database is up and running, and then it found that the migration for the chat created 2 models and performed everything. And the reason why this is working is because that we have this entry point that makes sure that these 2 are run every time we run docker compose up. We can also just register both of these in the admin interface in case we need them there. So from.models import conversation and conversation message. Admin.site.register conversation and admin.site.register conversation message. So if I save now, head to Chrome, find here, I can refresh, and then I can see all of the messages and all of the conversations. Great. So now that we have the database models, we need a way to get the data out of the database. So we need some serializers. So serializers.py. Then we can begin by importing this from the REST framework. So from REST framework import serializers. We can import both of the models from .models import conversation and conversation message. And since we're going to show a conversation in the front end like this, we need to get the name of the user and not just ID. So we need the user detail serializer. From user account.serializers import user detail serializer. And then we can set up the serializer for the list, which is this one. So class conversation list serializer and pass in serializer.model serializer. Here we can say users. So we just refer to this field and say that we're going to use this serializer up here. And in here we can just say many equals true and read only equals true as well. We use this in case we're going to use this to actually create a conversation. We are not going to do that, but if we have this, we want to create a new user. And then there's a class meta and pass in model equals conversation and which fields we want. And here we want the ID, we want the users field, and when this was modified. So modified at save. So then we have the serializer and we have the models. Next we need the API field because we need to actually get the conversations and similar. So I want to have this in a file called api.py here as well. So we can begin by importing a few things from Django.http import JSON response and the API decorator from REST framework.decorators import API view. And we can import the conversation model from .models import conversation and from .serializers import conversation list serializer. Then we can create the view for this API view. This is going to just be a get because I only want to get these here. Def conversations list and pass in what do you expecting? Okay, request and a colon there. And then we need to use this serializer here and also get all of the conversations for the logged in user. So serializer equals conversation list serializer, pass in request.user.conversations.all. We could assign a variable to this, but we can also just put it right in here. Many equals true, because this will be a list of conversations. Then we return the data by saying return JSON response, pass in serializer.data. So now we have the view for this as well. Next step then is to create the URLs file. So to keep this as clean as possible, we want the URLs file like that here as well. So urls.py and from Django.urls import path from .import API. So we just import the whole file. Now we can set up the URL patterns equals path, and when this is empty we want to use API.conversations list, and we can set the name, not necessary, but we can set it to API conversations list and save. So last thing now is to just find the Django BNB backend folder with the main URLs file and create an instance here as well. So chat and say chat.urls, which will point to this one. Okay, so now I think everything in the backend should be ready to be used. So let's head to the front end. I can just close these files. It's a little bit easier to keep track. So then we can close the backend for now, find app and locate the page inbox page.tsx. So right now everything here is hard coded, so we need to fix that. At the top here we can import the API service we have created, and we need to import a few things from React as well. So import React, comma, and in here use state and also use effect, because you need to do a few things when this is loaded. And this should be imported from React. Then up here I want to do the same thing with the user ID that we did on the My Favorites page. So page.tsx in favorites. We can copy this line and paste it at the top, and we can copy these lines. Actually, we can just copy everything down to there, so we don't have to rewrite it again. So we have it here. So I can just copy this and paste it there. This needs to be converted to an asynchronous function like that. Okay, so now we check if the user is authenticated and similar. I want to set up two types that are going to be used down here, because we want to need one type for the user and one type for the conversation, just that we know which data that we actually have available for these two types of objects. So at the top here we can say export type user type equals, and this should have ID, which is a string. It should have a name, which is also a string, and avatar URL, which is also a string, and one type for the conversation type, and this needs ID, which is a string, and a list of users, and this uses this type up here, so user type, and add an empty array, because it's going to be a list or an array of users. Then after this has been done, we can do it down here. Then we can say const conversations equals await API service.get, and we want to get API slash chat. I think that's the correct URL. And when we have these, we can loop through them and show them instead of these hard-coded conversations. So down here we can say conversations.map, put them into a variable called conversation, and this is a type of conversation type. So now since we use TypeScript, we know that this has to include these fields here. If not, it will crash. So if it works, then it works. If it doesn't, then we know that where the error is. Add the curly braces and say return. And then in here we can say conversation and remove that one. Save. So if I go back now, unexpected type error is not valid JSON. In order to allow non-date, yes, I need to set the safe parameter to be false on the API. So let's go back here and say safe equals false. So then that restarted. If I refresh, then I get there, but there are no conversations because we don't have any. So let me just create a conversation in here between Stein. Stein at Stein is the current user I'm in, and I can talk with Stein at code with Stein. Save. So if I now go back and refresh, I get the conversation, but the information here is hard-coded. So that can be the next step to fix. So here we need to pass in this object, conversation, like that, equals like that. And I also want to pass in the user ID, since this is something we already got up here. I'll get some warnings down here because these are not supposed to be there right now. But that can also be fixed, of course. So I just need to find this conversation component here. If I hold in my command button, I'm not sure what this is on Windows, I can just click it and the file will be opened. So I need to rebuild this very much. First I need to set this to be a client component, so use client. We need a router here because we need to be able to go into a conversation, so import, use a router from, this should come from next navigation, not next router. And we can import the conversation type that we have created down there, so we don't have to recreate it. Import conversation type. And we can import a custom button, import custom button, so we can use that to go into a conversation. And then we need to specify which properties we can pass in here. So then we say interface conversation props, curly brace, no equal sign, and here is expect a conversation, and this should be a type of conversation type, and a user ID, which should be a string. Like that. I think I can set semicolons there. And then this needs to be converted to a react.function component, where we can pass in the conversation props. And then in this here, we can pass in the conversation and the user ID. And before we start doing this dynamic, we can initialize the router by saying const router equals use router. And we can find out which of the users in the list of user is the other user. So const other user equals conversation.users.find, create a user variable, and we want to find where the user.id not equals user ID, because user ID, which we have up here, is your user ID. Then in here, I want to check one thing. I think we need to set a key here to be conversation.id, just so this field is unique, like that. And then in here we can say other user (name) in case there is something weird going on. I just need to do it like this. We can use this here. Just create, move these to separate lines and say on click. And when you click this, then I want to create a function, and I want to go to use the router to set the router.push, pass in the backticks and backslash inbox, and then the conversation.id, and save. So I think that should be it now. So yes, now you can see that I have Stein, which is the person I'm talking to, and if I click go to conversation, then I'm sent to a conversation with this ID, which hopefully is the same ID as we can see here. Great, so then everything there is working. So now I can set this to done. Okay, so this page that we see here also needs to be dynamic, but that will be a part of these tasks, as you can see here. So the next step now will actually be to start setting up the WebSocket so that we can have live chat. We're going to begin by installing software. We're going to install channels, Daphne, and a little bit like that. When that is done, we can set up basic consumers, set up routing, and before we do this, configuration. Yes, I'm not 100% sure what order all of this is going to be in, so I'm just going to begin at the beginning by installing everything that we need. So we can go to the terminal to stop this and find the requirements txt. Okay, we have already added this, so that means that it's installed. Nice. So I can just set this to done. Perfect. And if I find the settings.py, okay, we still need to do some configurations. Yes, but we have added... No, we have not added anything here. Okay, so that's the next step. Okay, so up here somewhere in install apps we can add daphne, which is sort of a server thing-ish that channels needs to run inside the Django. Then we can add a configuration here called channel_layers. So this is where we decide where the information from a conversation should be stored. For example, in memory, how you cache it, or if you're going to use a Redis and similar. So the default way to do this is to do it like this. The backend I want to use in this tutorial is to just store it in the memory until we have stored it in the database. So we can say channels.layers.in-memory channel layer. So that was it here. Next, actually we need to add one more thing down here. Right down here we have something called WSGI application. This is entry points for the web server into Django for normal HTTP and HTTPS, but we also need for asynchronous functions. So we need to set up ASGI_application. Then we can just copy this and replace it with ASGI.application. So we are definitely going to get an error now if we try to run this, but we just need to open up ASGI and do some changes here. So this application thing here can be a little bit tricky to understand, and you're not going to use it much. When you've done this configuration, it will work, and you don't have to do it until you set up a new project anyways. So just try to follow along, do it a couple of times, and hopefully you will get it after a while. We can begin by importing a few things from channels. So first we say from channels.auth we import auth middleware stack. From channels.routing we import protocol type router and URL router. And from channels.security.websocket we import allowed hosts origin validator. And some of this is something that we need to make sure that the user is authenticated and similar, because this is done a little bit different than other type of authentication that we have in the project. This can just be like it is, and this is just to set up this sort of script here and make sure that this is the settings file that we are using. Then we get the application just like we do here. And now we have sort of set up Django and we can use things from the project. And here is a from chat import routing. and from chat.token auth import token auth middleware. So this is going to be created soon, and this is going to be created soon. Then down here we need to just do some configurations to this variable here. So application equals protocol type router. This is then this type of router we're going to use here. If it's HTTP, then we just say get API application, so we just reuse this up here. And if it's a WebSocket, then we say token auth middleware, because then we need to authenticate the user a little bit different. Pass in the URL router here, and then we say routing.websocket_URL patterns. So I will take you through a few of these things very soon now, and hopefully clear things up. So the first thing we can do is to create the routing file. So inside this chat application, we create a new file called routing.py. And this file is going to look very similar to the URLs file. So we can begin by importing path from Django.urls import path, and from .import consumers. We have not created this either, but we're going to do that soon. Now we set up the WebSocket URL patterns. This is the one we are referring to here. This would be just like a typical URL patterns, but we want to just specify that this is a WebSocket. Set up a URL and path, and when the path is ws/string str, because we are expecting a string here, which should be called the room name, and this should use the consumers.chatConsumer.asgi. So next step then will be to set up this consumer. Sorry, not the next step, because I want to set up this token auth, since we are just finishing up this ASGI file. So I get that this is a little bit much information at once, but hopefully I explain it so you understand. Token auth.py. This is a file we need to make it possible to actually use the authentication and token authentication. So first we can begin by importing a few things. From Django we import the anonymous user, which is a model. From channels.db we import database sync to async, so that we can get things from the database while we are waiting for things to finish. We import the base middleware because we're going to change the base middleware that comes from channels. And we import a token called, or a function called access token, because we want to make it possible to get the access token from the headers, and the user account models user, so that we can refer to a user. So now we're going to use the database sync to async to get the user, def get user, which is a function where we can pass in a variable called token key. We want to use a try catch here, just to so the server doesn't crash if there is something wrong. Token equals access token key. So now we get the access token based on the token key we pass in. The user ID should come from token.payload and then user_ID. So this should be passed in somewhere. I will show you soon. And then we can say return user.objects.get, where the primary key is user ID. If this doesn't work, for example, if this user ID isn't set on this, or this primary key doesn't exist, then we need an except here. So exception SE, and then just return anonymous user. So then I know that this will give us the authenticated user if it is there. So then we need to set up the token auth middleware. So class token auth middleware, where we pass in base middleware because this is what we want to override. Here we can say def init to override the initialization method, self and inner. And here we just say self.inner equals inner. And then we need one asynchronous method, async def underscore call. And when this is called, then we want to pass in self, scope, receive, and send. And then there's a little bit of a long sentence query where we set up a dictionary. We split the URL string that we get in the browser and we split it by the ampersand to get the query string, etc. So we know what is in there. And to get the token key, we can say token key equals query.get, since this is a dictionary, token. And then we can say scope user, sorry, I need to use tuples, equals await get user, pass in token key. So now if we get the user from this function and append it to the scope, and a scope is sort of like a session, so we just append the user object into that. And then we call the parent function call and just pass in what we have here. So now the scope and this token middleware should have the user that is authenticated. So now the error there is gone. Everything looks okay here. The router is almost okay. We just need to set up a base chat consumer. And when that's finished, we can start to try to connect from the front end. Okay, so most of what we have done here is sort of configuration and similar. So now we are actually going to create a file called consumers.py, which is where all of the magic will happen for the WebSocket. So we can begin by importing JSON, which is something we're going to use here. JSON. And we're going to import a few more things from ASGI ref.sync, import sync to async. This is something we need to make it possible to store things in the database, because we can't just directly do that in a socket. From channels.generic.websocket import async WebSocket consumer, and we can import the conversation message model from .models import conversation message. This is needed to create a message. And then we create a new class called chat consumer, which is the one we are referring to in here. This is the file and this is the class name. In here we can pass in async WebSocket consumer, and then we need to create an asynchronous function called connect, and this is the one we are connecting to, self. Then we can say self.room name equals self.scope URL route kwargs room underscore name. And scope is sort of the session, as I said previously. This is the URL route, and then kwargs is everything that is passed into at the end here. Room name is this one, so we just get the room name from the URL. Now set self.room group name equals chat underscore %s to format this, or we can say f and do it a little bit better, self.room name. So we just build a different type of string that is the group name we're connecting to. Join room, and then here we can say await, so we await for this to happen. Self.channel layer. So now we are talking to the thing in the settings.py where we define where things are stored temporarily. Group underscore add self.room group underscore name self.channel underscore name. And the room name should be something unique, because if not, other users could also connect to this. So we're going to use the ID of the property and the user or similar like that. And when this is done, we just say await self.accept. So then we should be connected to the server. We also need a disconnect function. So async def disconnect self leave room, leave room, and then we just await self.channel layer group discard. So then we just jump out of this. Here we also can pass in these two variables, and that's the disconnect functionality. So I think everything should be ready now. We can try to run docker compose up, see if there are any errors. No changes. And now you can see that this here has changed a little bit. Starting ASGI/Daphne version 4. Version 4 is Daphne, and this is still the same. So if I go here now, the backend is still working as it should, and hopefully the frontend is also working. Yes, great. So that means that now we have set up everything we need in the backend to connect to this at least. So now we want to make it possible to connect from the front end. By the way, if you want to learn even more Django or Vue from me, you should check out my website codewithstein.com. The site has many premium courses and a lot of awesome blog posts. And for as little as $20 per month, you will get access to all of my content, and you will be able to track your progress. You can talk to me and similar. So go to codewithstein.com after the video and sign up. So first we need to install one thing. So just stop React or Next running here and say npm install react-use-websocket cut package.json. Just need to see that everything is installed. I think I need more. npm install socket.io and socket.io-client. So these are all things that we need in order to talk to the backend. Not 100% sure about these. I just see that I have them in my dependencies. So let's just keep them there for now, and then we can run this here again, npm run dev. If I refresh, it should still just be like it is. I want to open up the inspector because I want to look for error messages now that we're going to start working with the WebSockets. So I can close the ASGI now and the routing and the token auth and my favorites and conversation and that one. So I only have the consumers up because we're going to do some changes to that soon. So if I scroll in here and find the ID inside there and open up the conversation detail page, here are a few, or actually a lot of things that we need to do. First, we can open up the favorites page again, just because favorites, because I want to have this check in the detail page here as well, just to make sure that we are authenticated. So make this asynchronous, and then we just need to import this here as well, like that. So that did not exist. It was in a different folder, so just add // there as well. You're going to need a few things from React. So import React, use state and use effect from React. And we're going to need API service, and I want to set up a type for the message. So export type message type equals, this needs an ID, which is a string. It needs a name, which is also a string. It needs a body, which is also a string, and a conversation ID, which is also a string, and sent to, which can also just be a string. We don't need information about the user. And created by should be a user type. Actually, the sent to can also just be the user type, which is then automatically imported there. So then we have that. I need to convert this a little bit because we need to make it possible to pass in the parameters here. So inside here we say params and then colon, add the params again, colon, ID, which is a string. So now we get the ID from the URL in here as well. First we get the user ID, and then below here we can get all of the conversation. We can get the conversation that we are on. So const conversation equals await API service dot get. Here we need to use the backticks /API /conversations /API /chat and then we just pass in the params.id, add the slash at the end, and close with the backtick. So now we should get the conversation from the backend, which we're going to need to pass into this conversation detail soon. This page doesn't exist yet, so we can create that before we continue. So we can begin by creating the serializer for this. So inside the chat here, we need to create one more serializer. Class conversation detail serializer. Oops. Pass in serializers.model serializers. And here I also want to get the users. So copy this, and down here I want the same as this. Up here I want the same fields, so we can just save it like this. Open up the api.py inside the chat app and import it. Conversation detail serializer. And we can set up the view. So at API view, they should also only accept the get request method. Def conversations detail, pass in request and the primary key. And then we can get the conversation by saying conversation equals request.user.conversations.get primary key equals primary key. And this then makes sure that you can only get conversations that you are a part of. And then we can set up the serializer for the conversation. So conversation underscore serializer equals conversation detail serializer. There we pass in conversation and set many equals false, because now we don't want a list of conversation, only this specific one, which is an object. Now we return this, JSON response, conversation, pass in conversation serializer.data. And just to make sure, we can say safe equals false to make sure that we get everything there. And save. So last thing for the backend now should hopefully to just append this to the URLs file. So urls.py in the chat app path. Here we expect a UUID with the name of primary key, and this should use API.conversations detail, and the name can be API_conversations detail, and save. So now this should actually work, so we can get the information about the conversation, and then we can pass it into here. So conversation equals curly braces conversation. Get a warning here now because this component here doesn't expect this. So here we also need to do some changes. We can begin by importing the conversation type. Import conversation type from the inbox page. So now we know that we are going to have that here. Then we can set up the props, interface, conversation detail props. Then the curly brace. Here we expect to get in the conversation. And this should be a conversation type. Then we just need to convert this to a react.fc and pass in conversation detail properties. And in here we also say the conversation. And then we can set up, just like we did somewhere on the page for the inbox, we had this other user functionality. Other user, where did I use that? Other user, conversation, yes. Copy this function and go into the conversation detail, because I want to have that here as well. The user ID here is undefined, so we can pass that in here. Since we have it here, we can just pass it in, and then we are suddenly expecting one more property up here, user ID, which should be a string. Pass in user ID, and then the warning is gone. Nice. Then we can have one like this for my user, const my user equals copy, paste, and here we want where the ID is the same as mine. Okay, so now we can start working on the actually connecting to the WebSocket. So below where we have this, we can add these lines here. So what happens here is that we create 3 new variables: send JSON message, last JSON message, and ready state. So this is used to send messages, this is to get messages, and this is to handle when we are connected, disconnected, and similar. And you can see here that I get a warning, so I need to import this. Import use WebSocket from React use WebSocket, and there we should also import the ready state as well. And then we connect to the backend, which is this URL, and we use WS instead of HTTP here because we are connecting to a WebSocket. This was at the beginning of the routing.py file, and then this is the room name because it's the conversation ID. Here we need to pass in the token for the user, so that we know in the backend if we are authenticated or not. So we need to get that here as well. Token, which is a string, and we can pass that in here. Token, comma, and then we should get that somewhere here, so we can just pass it in. And this should be easy to get. At the top here, we can just say import get access token. This is a function we have created earlier. And then const token equals await get access token. So now we have it here in case we should need it somewhere else. And then we can just pass it in to the conversation detail. So now we have it here, and we can send that as well to the backend. Nice. To know if we are connected or not, we can use a use effect. So I need to import this from React, import use effect, and this will launch or trigger every time this is changed. So if you are connected, if you are disconnected and similar, then this will show in the console. So we can save now, go to the browser and see what happens here. Okay, conversation.user is undefined. Okay, maybe I did something wrong in this one. I thought the user, this was supposed to be in that one. We have a list of users, so why doesn't that work? Let's add the question mark here. So this will only trigger if there is users on the conversation. Yes, so let's pretend that it is working. Connection state changed to 1, so it went from 0 to 1. And if I go to the terminal, then you can see here handshaking. So it's starting to connect. The room number is undefined, so there's something weird, but we have at least connected to the WebSockets now. Nice. But why is the conversation ID is undefined? That's why the user doesn't exist either. String undefined. Yes, this might be undefined. So let's say if not user ID or if not token, then we go in there just to make sure that we actually have it before we go down there. So I think the reason why is that this is actually both. If I open up the API.py, you can see that we are passing in the conversation there, so you need to say conversation.conversation. Great. So if I refresh now, then if I go here now, you can see that we're handshaking and we are connecting to the correct IDs there, and that's why also the users and similar are working now. Great. So now we can actually connect to the backend using WebSockets, and we are connected to this specific conversation. So now I can set this to done, and then I want to make it possible to send and receive messages. So the first thing we can do then is to change the consumer a little bit. Here we need a function for receiving messages, but also for sending messages. So let's just add a comment here, receive message from WebSockets. And then we can begin with the function async def receive self text data, and this contains all of the information we need. So we can load this using JSON, data equal json.loads, pass in text data. And then we need to get the conversation ID from here, conversation underscore ID equals data, because this contains an object called data, and in there we have the conversation ID. Copy and paste, because you need to know who we sent this to. Sent to ID, sent to ID. We need to know the name. It's just easier to keep track this way. And the body, which is the message itself. And when this is done, we can save the message to the database, but we have not come that far yet, so we just want to send this out to the rest of the users. So now we say await self.channel layer .group send self.group room group name. I want to talk to this, and the type of message we should send is chat message. This could be, for example, if you start typing and you want to show that to other users, this could be a different type. Want to send the body and the name, so it's just easy to show this in the list of messages. So this sort of just receives things from the chat. These will be used later, that's why they are grayed out. And then we want to have one message for sending messages. So this is then sending it out again to the group. So await, sorry, async def chat message. This is this type here. If you want to create more than this one, self event, then we get the body, event body, and the name, event name. And we can say await self.send, and what we want to send is text data equals json.dumps, create an array, and we want to send the body with information from the body, the name with information from the name variable. So that should be what we need to do in the backend. There are no errors. Nice. Okay, so now that everything is done in the backend, we can continue to the front end. So if I find a conversation detail, we should have this send button. This should be connected to a function, so just replace this with send message. So this is then getting a warning. We can add that here for now. Const send message equals, this is definitely going to be an asynchronous function like that. Const like that. So then that warning should be gone, and then this text field here needs to be connected to a variable or a state. So value can be sent to new message, and when we change this, so on change, then we want to pass this everything into an event and say set new message and pass in e.target.value. Okay, so now we get two new warnings here because we don't have these. So let's begin by importing use state, and then at the top here we can say const new message set new message equals use state, and just default this to be an empty string. So now we have a way to keep track of the message there, and then we just need to configure this to actually send the information to the socket. So what I want to do in here is to call a function called send JSON message, which is the one we imported there. And this should have a few fields. For example, event can be set to chat message. You probably recognize this from the consumer here. So we get this here and it's sent back and forth with this name. So I want to send a chat message, and this should have a data array with the body field, new message, which is the one we are writing down in the text field down there. I want to have the name, which should be my user, if this exists, dot name, and sent to ID should be the other user, question mark dot ID, and we need to pass in the conversation underscore ID, and that should be conversation.id. So these four fields here are the one that we are getting here. When the message is sent, then we can say set new message to be an empty string, so it's cleared. And after a few milliseconds, I want to scroll us down to the bottom of the div where the messages is. So set timeout, create a function in here, just call scroll to bottom, and this can be triggered after 50 milliseconds. So I can just create this function before I do anything else. Scroll to bottom equals create a function, and this can say if messages div.current, so you can see that if this reference is existing down here, then we can call this by saying messages div.current.scroll top, so we call the scroll functionality in there, equals messages div.current.scroll height. So then will this automatically scroll to the bottom, hiked, like that. Okay, so I have a few warnings here now because this doesn't exist and there is a little typo, messages div. So let's import useRef from React so that we can actually refer to a message div. And then we can say const messages div equals useRef, pass in null as a default value, and then down here it should be on not that yes, this element which has all of the messages. Then we can say ref equals messages div. So this will then scroll to the bottom each time we send a new message. So let's go here now and refresh. Let's see what happens. Refresh. The backend. Disconnect. Actually not sure if this... So typo and property scroller does not exist on type never. So let's add this question mark there. No. So to add the console log here. Send message, so it's easier to see that when we have clicked this. But first I need to find out why. Yes, now I am connected. So let me try to send a message. Nothing happens there, nothing happens here. Actually, just that this is sent and this is emptied. So I think that we can send the messages now. Now we just need to receive the messages and print them out in this list. So to do that, we need to add an array to keep track of all of the real-time messages. So here, where we have this, we can say const real-time messages, set real-time messages. And this is a use state because we need to keep track of them in there. And we want to set this to be a type of message, a list of message actually. And empty this by default. Now we get a warning here because we haven't imported this yet. So we can do that, import message type actually. Sorry, message type, which is the one we created for the conversation list. Now that we have this, we can loop through each of these messages and print them out in here. So below here, we can say real-time messages.map, create a message there like that, and we can get the index as well for the key. Create the parentheses, and now we can use a div key, pass in the index key there, and then we can say class name, and here we sometimes need this class and sometimes we need that class. So we need to do this a little bit different. So we need a curly brace and the backticks. So we can set the height, the width to always be 80% because that's on all of them. The padding and the rounded XL is also on all of them. But if the message.name is the other is your own message, then we need to do one thing and vice versa. So if message.name equals my user.name, then we set margin left to be 20%, and we can also set the background to be blue, so that's your bubbles. If that's not your name, then we can set the background to just be BG Gray 200. Okay, so we can close that div and we can close that div. So all of the warnings are gone. Then we can print the name of this user. So message.name. And then below here, the message.body. Save. So if I go back now, try to refresh, try to send a message, nothing still happens because we have not appended the messages that we get from the server to this list. So that's the last thing we need to do before we can actually test that this is working now. So to receive the messages, let me just remove these two so I don't have any hard-coded messages. I want to use one more use effect. And this should have the dependency for this last JSON message. And every time that we receive a message, I also want to scroll to the bottom so that we are always on the bottom of the conversation. Here I want to check the message type and a few other things. So I have this long if statement here. So first of all, we check that this actually has value. Then we check that this is a type of object. We see that name is in this, and we see that body is in the information that this has. Okay, so that means that we can proceed and create an object of this. So then use this here. Oops, message type. So I want to create a new message and say that this should be a type of message type, and here we are expecting an ID which can just be empty. For this case we set the name that comes from the server, the body from the server, and the conversation ID which we already have. And then this can be appended to the list of real-time messages by saying set real-time messages parentheses and one extra parenthesis where we pass in real-time messages, arrow function, and to an array. And here we want to unpack all of the previously real-time messages, and we want to append the new message at the end there. Conversation ID string. So I just want to open this. I missed the sent to and the created by. So sent to, that I think should just be the other user, and the other one was created by, should be my user. So get a new warning here now. User type. Maybe I need to import this. Import user type. There. Let's see if I can use that then. User type. No, as user type. Like that, yes. And as user type. So then I can save now, go back and refresh. Check here, I am connected. Try to send a message, and then the message appeared. Wonderful. The name is missing, I see that, but it is at least real time now. Message.name, why is it missing? Consumer, it gets the name, pass in the name, it has the name there, it has the name there. And when we send the message, my user.name, it might be because my user doesn't have a name. Let me just set the default name for now, John, and just comment out this for now. So you can just see that that is actually the problem. Yes, it's just because my user doesn't have a name. you probably have that. I had just probably created my user in a dumb way or something like that. But now we can send and receive messages. If I had two screens now, you would see that this was working in real time. Next step then is to store and load the messages. So the messages that we get now is not stored in a database, so I want to do that. So I just need to create a new function here that needs to be called up here. So this needs to use this sync to async functionality, and we can call this def save message. In here I want to pass in self, since this is a class. I want to get the conversation underscore ID. I want to get the body and the sent to ID, and this should say user equals self.scope user. So this is what we did previously when we authenticated the user with the middleware and similar. And then we can say conversation message dot objects dot create, pass in conversation ID equals conversation ID that we get from up here. The body can be set to body, the sent to ID can be sent to sent to ID, and created by can be sent to user, which we are authenticated as. So after this is now then sent to the group, then we can down here say await save message. This actually needs to be self.save message, since this is a class. Now we can pass in the conversation ID. We need to do this in the same order. We need to pass in the body and the sent to ID. So there we are now redirected there. Let me try to refresh and send a message and see if it will be stored. There are no errors, at least. That's great. Conversation message. Yes, it was stored. Nice. So last step then is to go to the to-do list again, is to load the messages and print them out at the beginning of a conversation. So if I now go to the serializers in the chat tab, we need the serializers for the messages. So class conversation message serializer, pass in serializer.model serializer. And then in here we need to use the user serializer twice. So copy one of these, replace this with sent to. Many should definitely be false here because we have only sent to one. Paste it again as I created by. Many should also be set to false again. Set up the class meta for the configuration. Model should be conversation message. Oops, conversation message. And the fields we want here is the ID, we want the body, we want the sent to, and who created this, so created by. So now I can close that and open up the API and do some changes. We already have this, so we just need to import conversation message and conversation message serializer. And then down here we can say convert messages serializer equals conversation message serializer. We will pass in conversation.messages.all, so we just get all of the messages that are stored for this conversation. Set many to be true. Then we can pass it in down here. Just say messages serializer.data and save. So the backend should now be ready. Now we just need to store them into a state here. So maybe I don't need a state after all. I think I can just reach them through the conversation. So above here I can try to say conversation.messages. No, this doesn't have that, of course. No. Sorry. Need to open up the conversation page. I want to do that there. So in inbox ID page.tsx. So here I have the message type, and here I want to set up a list with the variables for the messages. And then in here the messages should be somewhere here. Maybe I can just copy and paste this and say old messages and set old messages. We use the message type here as well. Scroll down. Then we can have one more use effect, and they should only be run one time, since it's only want to be loaded when we load. So the dependency can be empty here. And then I might be able to just say set old messages to be conversation.messages. Property does not exist on type conversation type. Okay, let me try to do this a little bit different. Just remove this and remove this. Open up the page.tsx in the inbox here, the conversation detail page. Messages equals conversation.messages. I just get a warning because messages isn't expected up here. But we can change this a little bit. That might be the easiest way to do this. Messages, message, which is an array of message type. And then I think I can just loop through the messages directly. So I can make a copy of this and say messages. Cannot find messages. Did you mean? Sorry, forgot to pause it in down here. Messages. So warning is gone. Go back and refresh, and then I have that there. Great. The name does not exist. It's probably because there isn't a name on that one. So instead of saying just message.name, we can say message.createdby.name. That did not change anything. Again, I think it's because my user doesn't have a name and I don't have the user there. Sorry. Let me open up admin.py in the user account and just fix this once and for all. From .models import user admin.site.register user. Go back and refresh. Now I have the user here. I find Stein at Stein and I can set the name. What should that be? Coder. Just to separate it from my other names. Please correct. Avatar. Go back and refresh. And now you can see that I get a name there. If I try to send a message, it will be sent under there. Great. But the message isn't blue. That's not good. Created by... So if I save now, refresh, still not blue. My user.name, what can this be? Why isn't that coder? So they are the same. So now it's blue and I use double quotes. Okay, is this working? No. Message.name, message.username. It's most likely because the name there is John now. So now I can remove this one, refresh. So now it's working. So the blue is there. If there was another user talking to me, the gray bubbles would be on the left side. Great. So now we can send messages, everything is stored in the database and similar. So I can set this to done. Okay, so now I want to make it possible to start a conversation with the landlord. So I can begin with the backend for this as well. So the consumers should be ready now. This should actually go in the API itself. So if I scroll down and find chat API, then we can create a new view at the bottom here. API view, and I still only want to use the get request method because I want to just get a conversation ID. Def conversations start a request user ID, and this will be the user ID for the landlord. So first I want to check that if there is a conversation between me and him, conversations equals conversation.objects.filter, where users in equals user ID. So first I get all of the conversation for that specific user, and I want to check if I'm in that list as well. So filter users in, sorry, double underscore in equals request.user.id. So now I filter conversations that I'm in and that the landlord is in. Then I can say if conversations.count is greater than 0, then I know that there is a conversation. I can just say return JSON response success, sorry, curly brace, success set to be true, double C, sorry. And I want to get the conversation ID. So conversation underscore ID should be conversation.id. I need to get the first in that list. So I should say conversation equals conversations.first. There are not more than one anyways, but still this is how I want to do it. And then if there isn't a conversation, we need to create it. So else, then I say user equals user.objects.get, where primary key is user ID. So I just get this user from the database. I need the model for that from user account.models import user, capital U. And then I can say conversation equals conversation.objects.create. So just create an empty object for that. Conversation.users.add request.user, conversation.users.add request. Sorry, not request.user, but now add the other user. And then I can return here as well, just like I do there. So then I know that there is a conversation at all times. So I just need to set up the URLs file for this. So between these we can set path start slash UUID, and here we expect a UUID called user ID. And we want to use conversations start. Name can be API underscore conversations start, and save. So that's everything we need to do in the backend to create a new conversation. So now I want to make it possible to go into one of these properties, not my own, of course. Let's go to the first property where Stein is your host, and then I want to make it possible to click this button to be sent to our conversation or to create a new conversation. So first we can go back here and find the landlord detail page. So that should be in landlord's ID page.tsx. on this contact button, I want to pass in the user ID that is my own ID, user ID, and I want to pass in the landlord ID that I'm going to talk to, landlord ID. Here we can pass in the params ID, which is the one we are visiting. So I get some errors here because the contact button component isn't expecting this contact button. So this needs to be rebuilt a little bit in order to make this work. So convert this to a client component. And if we are not logged in, I want to log in the user. So let's import the use login module. So we can prompt that up. Import the use router from Next navigation. It's important that it is Next navigation. And I want to import the API service so we can check if there are a conversation or not with the function we just created. So then we can set up the properties, interface, contact button props. Here we are expecting the user ID, which can be a string or null. And we are expecting the landlord ID, which is also a string, but this cannot be null. And then we just need to convert this to a react.functional component and pass in the properties and pass these in here as well, so we can use the user ID and landlord ID. Now we can initialize the login module equals use login module, and we can initialize the router. Const router equals use router. When we click this div down here, I want to call a function. So down here we can say on click equals, and we say just start conversation. And I get the warning now because we haven't created it. That will be the last step here. So const start conversation. This should be an asynchronous function. Like that. In here we can check if we have the user ID. If we don't have the user ID, then we can just say login module dot open, and we will be showing the login screen. If we have the user ID, we can say const conversation to get the conversation from the server. Await API service dot get. Use the backticks here. Slash API slash chat slash start slash pass in the landlord ID. Add the slash at the end and close the backticks. What's wrong? There, I just used front ticks or something weird. Okay, and when we get this back, then we can say if conversation.conversation ID. We should get that anyways, but just nice to make sure. Then we can say router.push, and then we want to go to use backticks again, slash inbox slash pass in the conversation.conversation ID, and we should have a conversation. So if I click this now, I'm sent to this because there is already a conversation with this user and I can talk there. If I refresh, the messages is there. Nice. So that means that now we should be able to start conversations as well. Maybe I can select a different owner for this property. In Angola, we set that to admin at admin. Refresh, that was not that one, it's not this one, so then it's the last one, of course. Oops, went a little bit too quick. Okay, it was this one, belongs to admin. Okay, let's set the name to admin. So I can separate them a little bit. He also needs an avatar. Save and save. So if I refresh now, then you can see admin is your host. Let me try to start a conversation. Go new conversation with him, refresh, the message is there. And if I go to my inbox, I do now have 2 conversations there. Perfect. So now we actually just have one more very big task before we can deploy this project. Nice. And that was it for this time. If you have any questions about today's code, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll answer as soon as I can. See you in the next video.